Hi, I'm the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and if I had to survive the end of the world with only 4 books in my knapsack, I guarantee you I'd bring the following 4 books into the future with me. Welcome to the Unauthorized and Explicit Readings Book Club promo ahead of today's GMT episode. Go support your local bookstore. Browse around, buy a coffee, and maybe pick up one of these 4 books for your own personal enjoyment. The Way of Zen by Alan Watts, The History of God by Karen Armstrong, The Dancing Wu Li Masters by Gary Zukov, The Law of Light by Lars Mull. This guy right here, genuinely, authentically, and hopefully without infringing on anybody's rights, strongly recommends those books. No one's paying me to say that. I bought those books on my own at some point in my life and read them repeatedly because they're awesome and mind-meltingly important. And now, thank you for tuning in.
Almost Daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Greetings, good morning, salutations. Good evening and good night. Hello and namaste. I am your favorite talk show radio style podcast host. At least half the time, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. The other half the time, I'm not your favorite, but you're listening now. Thanks for tuning in, folks. This is Good Morning Trumptopia. And what a strange world we live in. Big issues, big politics, big normalizations of what is going on. Clearly, we are living through unprecedented, historic times. Some take this as sign of the apocalypse. Some presume that it's just, consistent with the acceleration of all things as we ever increasingly approach the transcendental object at the end of time. Some of you have never heard of Terence McKenna, and it shows. And in my universe, your argument is flawed if it does not take into account everything that Terence McKenna has to say, especially when you couple it with a bunch of other people's accounts of what's going on in the universe. But that's neither here nor there, until it is. So, it's a Congressional Inquisition happening before us, and I've been really kind of hesitant to address it just yet, but it's been going on now for a couple of days. And the big takeaway, no matter how you slice it, and I don't say that willy-nilly, because people are slicing this all kinds of way, folks. I guarantee you. And that's a fascinating thing. But what am I trying to say? The big takeaway, I think, and I wrote this down yesterday at 7:46 a.m., thinking I was going to jump onto the podcast platform and do you a show, but it kind of took it out of me. It was a bit exhausting intellectually and emotionally because I got sucked into the wide-ranging debate, both on my comment and on some others, and I never got around to. I just spent too much time sort of processing the world, processing what was said. But if you were to turn to me on a panel of discussion, I'd be like, well, my top headline is, not that I'm a journalist, because I'm not, folks. Don't confuse me for one. I'm just a guy with an opinion and a podcast that you're listening to. The FBI director Wray's testimony yesterday, no matter how you slice it up, no matter how you spin it, no matter how you reinterpret it, in my humble opinion, confirms something that many folks that I identify with, that I consider myself a member of, a concerned community of of human beings or of participants on Earth, citizens of the world, that ideological extremist violence is indeed escalating. Now, I added those salty provisos because all over social media there is, of course, every kind of possible interpretation, negation, dismissal of both Mr. Director Wray's statements and the ongoing political procedure, which, it must be remembered, the events in Congress are political by nature. There's no calling it a political show, which I often will do, is kind of like, for me, satire, not of the event so much, but of the people who dismiss it as political theater, because that's what it is. It always has been that. It's political public discourse, right? And yes, we could argue and tug and pull in both directions, in however many directions you want, the tug of war rope of credibility and whether or not we should take this kind of political event seriously. I'm a real world absurdist. If you strip away all my esoteric spiritual nonsense, I'm still artistically and in the French, philosophical way. I don't know why I made it French. I guess the way the French approach philosophy with a sort of blasé-faire sort of, we understand it and all, but the food and the wine and the life, so much easier. And that's a, am I being racist? Is that racist? I don't know. But we're certainly we're in a culture of increasingly ratcheted, hyper-polemic tension, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you spin it. And it's happening, right? It's not happening. The torque is there. The stress on the stress load as a collective of people, as a community of peoples, is there. Where am I on the spectrum of analysis? As a talking bobblehead figurine in the theater of your mind, dashing as I may or may not be in your imagination, I do think that there's sort of a really big picture problem with where we are at. For better or worse, whose ever fault it is, whether it's Trump's alone, pardon the pun, or the play on his own words. It's not really a pun. He alone could fix it. Fix what? I don't know. Did he fix it? They think he did. I don't know that he fixed anything. I can't confirm nor deny any of it, really. Not without a bigger budget and, etc. Capital investment, whatnot. But I digress. There's a big fat obvious pink elephant in the room status level problem, is that the viewers, and you know how I often ask on my social media, I wonder if the Trumptopian base is watching this thing or that thing. When it's been specifically sort of like the impeachment, like I wonder if they're going to bother to listen with any sort of even remote attempt at an open mind or not. Clearly, without judgment here, because honestly, that's not what I'm about. And I know some of you might agree. Some of you might be sitting there judging me like, nah, he's so full of shit. He's so just sitting there judging people. But that's more about you than it is about me, because I'm fairly certain in my own mind and my own understanding that I don't. I do call things out as I see them. The Trumptopian tolerance level problem. And I'm not, this is someone else, did I already read this bit? Someone did a beautiful frog in the waters being boiled analysis that's got to do with the news and how most people criticizing current events might be missing the boat. And that's that, like, CNN and Fox are going to survive, and then what's really being boiled out is any of the, or attempting to, is the fringe, small, locally owned, still independent news media platforms, which you might. I'm just a guy with a podcast platform. I don't pretend to already be anything that I'm not. Like, I don't pretend to be at some sort of like if I had home box office money to produce a show, trust I'd be doing something wackier. But yes, the milieu of like Trumpism tolerance level test, the phenomena that's happening and happened on so many fronts brings us to where we're at, right? And makes it so that free speech rights, people are saying, all kinds of things. And where does a Joe Schmo like me land on this, and why do you care? Because I think I see a through line. I see multiple through lines. And to, revert back to like a meta-analysis, the audience the audiences, multiple, plural, that are watching this, and those that are not, asterisk point, because they are an important demographic, are going to see this and take it and receive it and internalize it and act on it or dismiss it or whatever and have opinions about it. I think generally in some straightforward buckets. I think I see three. Like the everyday normal average people, which some label sheeple, I think is rude, who take it seriously, right? They see law enforcement agencies on the news in front of Congress, and they live inside of and I say statist, and sometimes I mean that a little judgmentally, because I'm not exactly anti-statist, but I'm not for being a blind faith, blinders on, 100% all pro, patriot statist either, right? I dance a delicate dance. And there's all kinds of people, and there's a big broad spectrum there, which should be acknowledged. And I think it's painted over with way too broad a brush by a lot of people commenting. But there's people, let's just leave it at people who take it seriously. Judge them however you may. Then there's the people who are going to be deniers or discreditors for whatever reason, like that they know better. They somehow, based on whatever questionable content, which may or may not be qualifying as conspiracy theory content, and I'm not necessarily dismissive of it, but I'm also not a blind faith conspiracy theorist believer, right? I try not to fall into the blind faith believer of anything. trying to tread a fine tread, dance a fine dance, if that makes any sense. And then, quite honestly, which is the sort of, let's not forget, there are those who are caught up in, involved in, sympathetic of, or in somehow, should be counted as the very people that are what's being investigated and commented on, and are those people who are wanting to foment politically motivated violence here domestically against the people in power in America, one way or the other. Right? And each of these, because stop and think about it. And this is one of those things that's been troubling me deeply ever since I've seen multiple examples of it. And I don't want to make too broad a generalization. I don't want to say all Trump supporters think this or would say this or would agree with this, but there seems to be evidence. And I know that there's going to be the knee-jerk counter narrative of like, that's all fake news, which is weird, especially when they dismiss fake news about their own folks. It's extra kind of mind-boggling because it's their own folks. But they're conditioned to, if CNN says it, it's got to be a lie. Even if it's a fellow Trump supporter on CNN saying it, it's a lie. Which is this recursive loop of denialism, which can get a little out of control, folks. But there's evidence, as I've seen, not just on CNN, but on multiple media platforms in multiple places, in multiple ways, in multiple dimensions, evidence of folks that simultaneously support Trump. Okay, let's not be blunt force about this. Let's draw a sophisticated Venn diagram map of different vectors here. People who support Trump, people who buy into and or dare to say out loud that they believe in Q as a whole package thing. They summarily believe in Q, whatever that entails. However deeply or shallowly misinformed they may or may not be about Q. And mind you, asterisk point, don't sue me. I don't pretend to be wholly, I'm no doctorate of what's going on in Q. I have an opinion based on what I've heard, but I'm the first to be like, and what I've heard is limited, and I'm sure that what the Q insiders who are really into it have seen is much more sophisticated and convincing than the evidence I've seen. But I'm basing my analysis on the words of those who speak for themselves as Q believers or Q anoners or supporters of Q or whatever, as I've seen presented to me by themselves and, in the world and its many platforms of representation. There seems to be a congruent thing going on there. I don't know. But put a pin in that, right? So there's like the general Trump base. There's the Trump base that is also Q self-identifying. They identify as subscribers of, to use internet jargon, Q. For better or worse, whatever that means. And I'm not judging, but I definitely can't understand why people do support or subscribe to this phenomena. I can't wrap my brain around it, and I can't agree yet. And I've tried, right? Like I've tried to go, okay, tell me why I should support this. And those are not. So those are different Venn diagrams. Then there are those that are being discussed, like the target subjects being discussed by the law enforcement individuals. For better or worse, there's varying degree, and this is just a fact, right? Like, don't freak out that I say this. There's varying degrees of support and or compliance with, and that's a very touchy word, triggering word, controversial word, perhaps. Support for, agreement with, believe, credibility rating of law enforcement officials at this level, at the federal level, at the alphabet soup letter name level. But for better or worse, one of my sort of default stances is for better or worse, they exist and they have authority in the world. And to some extent, to the best of my own understanding, as I'm not anti-law and order, right? Like some people objectively are, and that's hard, it gets hard for me to explain. I mean, it gets hard for me to understand how they explain and rationalize their enthusiastic belief that if there was less law and order, there'd be more peace and freedom. Because I can't help but wonder, what does freedom mean to people who want to do horrible things? The freedom to do horrible things. But, trying to thread the Zen through line with it too. What's my point? These events are happening, and I'm interrupting my own observing them to check them out. And they're epic and they're weird, and they have a big sort of important baseline thing that can't be denied no matter how you slice it. And that's that in terms of just factual, verifiable events, the numbers are creeping up verifiably over time. Now, some will automatically dismiss it. It's fake news because it's coming out of the mouths of X, Y, and Z. Do I buy into that? No. Do I think there's reason to be... there's always reason to be logical, a little dash of incredulity, and question everything, question the world, question the sources. Of course. But from, the increase in attacks on people simply for being Asian that are clearly happening to the increase in the support or the sort of incredulous hypocrisy of not seeing that praying to a golden statue of Donald Trump is explicitly, if you are supposed to be a Christian, something in your Bible that is labeled do not do. And there you all are either doing it or kind of wishing you were doing it or not condemning them for doing it, which is creepy. My deepest concern, which has always been, since, and I know I can come off a little bit like an ass, and you'll forgive me, but it's a fact. Since Ronald Reagan was in office, I've been incredulously going, hey, is it just me? Or, ... do some of these things feel like they're going on? And now some people will be like, wait a minute, how old is this fool? Be like, that's not true. And I'm like, no, yeah, even as a kid. I'm talking as soon as I started reading the English dictionary, because there's some cool words in there. And then you start thinking about what those words mean and the implications of those words about the world around you. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I was introduced to caffeine or coffee, both. Obviously, a little too young, which may or may not, actually is very true of me. I was introduced to coffee way too early in life. But it seems pretty obvious if you take a big bird's eye view of the meta patterns in media and in political rhetoric that the normalization of Trumptopian-like emotional, verbal, political, intellectual, psychological violence is not new and not Trumptopian, right? It's a Reagan era thing that has been encroaching. It's a pre-Reagan era thing, obviously. It's a cyclical human issue problem that has festered like a gross, disgusting, festering wound. Now, why would a gross, disgusting, festering wound fester openly? Because it's not healing right. And with that, folks, I drop the needle on a record that my animatronic I wish this was really vinyl. I'm cosplaying, right? In my mind, I'm in a 70s era radio station disc jockey booth, and the animatronic robot is like in a similar, like, but separated by a hermetically sealed compartment, because it would be dangerous if that robot and me were both in the same, space. Like, I need different things than that robot does, and that robot doesn't need them. So to save on money, that room just doesn't have them. It also preserves the vinyl, right? Like, in the future, that would be my, like, it's 70s style, but it's like way in the future, and it's sort of inspired by that radio station TV show from way back in time called WKRP. No, I don't know if that was the name of it, but something like that. Totally lost my jive. What was I doing? Oh, right, here you go. Oh, the Trumtopian irony, my friends. To get to a point I was trying to make earlier that I think I got lost in some loop about. It's troubling that there is this Venn diagram overlap of Trump/Q fans that very counterintuitively applaud and seem to be irrationally supporting, and or at least overtly referencing as an example of something they'd like to see here, the military coup going on in Myanmar. Because they believe, or aspirantly hope, aspirationally or aspirantly? Depends on which timeline, which universe you're in. They aspirationally hope / believe / wish that Trump can, could, should, would, might attempt to do such a thing here. Right? Like, wait, what? That's the most undemocratic, un-American thing I can think of anybody who calls themselves an American would ever want anybody to do. Even if they were a really good president. Which, by the way, despite the mythos building and the indoctrination, the repetition, it's a cult of repetition. If Trump says it more than once, it must be repeated until it's believed as fact. And tragically, while he has done some of the things that he's promised, some of the things I can't even disagree with, a point that should never be lost. Some things he did were like, oh, okay, cool. Yup, that one, rock on. Good on you for doing it. But the vast majority, to dispel the mythos, were, not that great, not that completed, not that fulfilled. And he broke a lot of, he technically they should be outraged. If they had really kept count, they should be outraged at how many things he said he would do that he never really ever did. Or that what he did was just like kind of worse than actually solving the problem. And now they want him to use the military as if he had them in his pocket, which I, please, frankly, cannot take seriously as a thing people believe. Because I've seen the guy on the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, like I've seen the guy on a pizza commercial eating pizza backwards. And I've seen the guy peddle himself about trying to make a buck while he's, bankrupting casinos. Casinos of all things. Now, I hate that's like it's a tired thing that Trumptopians trump by just willfully believing that he's a much more brilliantly skilled business person than the facts would prevail to show. Especially now, thank God, this will hopefully be let it be known, let it be said, let it be remembered throughout history. I said it here back in the day in what is probably now no longer online, it's like off the air, lost piece of tape, that his accountant, Alan Dingleberry, what's his face, forgive me, I cannot remember that dude's name right now. It's not Alan Dershowitz. That's the lawyer that is often way over there on the right, but is finally dropped away and is no longer associating himself with Trump, I don't think. But the other guy, Alan something else, that strongly increasing, I called this out forever ago, that I believe when the time came and his taxes were finally, brought out into the light to be seen by regulators, law enforcement, and the public, that he would turn, and I don't know that this has happened yet, but I feel it as a strong possibility, and I vote for it with my mind, and I humbly encourage all y'all who are down with what I mean by that to go ahead and vote for that too, because it would be brilliant to see Trump's fiscal corruption be neatly displayed before the world in a way and leading to places that would undeniably turn sour the taste in the mouths of all those that have been delightfully, gleefully supporting him. Forgive the sound effect. I still can't believe that Stephen Colbert had the cajones to say on mainstream media and NBC, prime time, late night talk show, and he didn't get fired for it. And it didn't get bleeped out what he said back in the day, calling it like it is. And it saddens me, right? Internationally, the left has got Russia and the right has got China. And domestically, the left has got systemic racism / white supremacy is the biggest political terror, domestic terror problem. And the right has got, the left is its own fucking domestic terror fucking nightmare. Echo chambering going on. And is it Geiselberg? Forgive me, my memory's hazy. But to tie things together, if Family Trump really does, as some enthusiasts have photoshopped them, wind up in orange jumpsuits on the cover of Time magazine, in an undebunkable, they can't, conspiracy theory kind of way, except for the most hardcore, the worst, most crippled human beings on the planet are, in my opinion, and that's not judgment, that's heart-wrenching empathy, are those that deny everything as a hoax. Anything and everything, it's a hoax. It's really the robots or the whatever. And anything that goes down, no matter how factually verifiable it might be, gets chucked out the window. And trust me, there's an active sort of hey, fall into that ego trap, sort of edge coin machine nudge maneuver going on to try to funnel people into that. So stay wary, folks. Because if you don't believe me, look Look over there on the right. Like, and this is encroaching on the left too. The left has its own weird blind spots of like, how do we not realize that we're like embracing nonsense and bringing it to this like unnecessary level? Like, cancel culture, if it isn't just yet, will get toxic and backfire on itself. There's also a sad and ridiculous yet slightly tasty irony of like some of the noisiest anti-cancel culture activists are the original cancel culturalists, which is, those who tried to cancel everybody else besides people who look just like themselves. What a weird human sociopathy bile loop of negative energy feedback. Right? And the evidence there is that, like, there are Christians who really willy-nilly, willfully neglect or don't see a problem with either literally themselves or others praying to a golden statue of Trump. Which, you can't... But it is what it is. What just happened, right? In the cacophony of all this craziness, the Biden administration has deftly maneuvered itself into using the language of de-escalation, dropping a couple bombs, to de-escalate as in preemptive strike-ive type style warning, like, hey, Middle East players in your proxy wars, we're not going to tolerate some nonsense, was the branding message. Now, boom, counterattack, surprise, surprise, and we're off to the races to some escalation and maybe some new endless war that gets declared that must be marshaled, more bodies to go march off and hurtle high-tech weaponry at ourselves and each other. And there will be, of course, the polite talk. And there's already, there's this whiplash whirling whirlpool of criticism, counter-criticism, critique, vis-a-vis the lens of Trump and Trumpism, right? Like, the things you'll tolerate as long as they're not done by someone like Trump is sort of like the new jab coming out from the middle right that's like not quite a Trump supporter, but definitely not a Biden supporter. So many things going on, folks, and where do we begin to wrap our hands around it? First things first, I want to say about one of the side issues going on, this $15 per hour minimum wage battle, to sort of drop the Congressional Inquisition theme for a moment, because that's happening, and that through line is percolating amidst all of this. As the pandemic rages on and the lockdown resumes to do another, like, will they flip flop? Will they rush to reopen too soon? Melodrama of like people calling it fake news, people hyper worrying about it being real news. All of this stuff is going on, and forgive my cynicism, but I gotta be blunt. Mind if I roll myself one and smoke it? 15 and say this to you while I do. I wish I was rolling in lots of copious amounts of weed that I literally could just pivot and roll a flat blunt. I don't have that much weed laying around. But I do happen to have the Bullite I had packed yesterday with some leftovers, so I might hit that in a kind of refresher toke. As I proceed to begin my day today with you folks joining the broadcast. But what was my point? Right, I'm getting blunt. $15 an hour minimum wage. It was too little, too late 10 years ago when the debate started. is a confusing, weird, sort of meaningless maneuver now, because some states, some cities, some companies have either already adopted $15 or something close. Some red states, Republican powered companies are a little lower on the spectrum at 10, 11, etc. Now, I don't want to be dismissive, because there's the overall, like, at least it balances out. There's the sort of incrementalist acceptance view that, like, it's a step, it's a baby step, it gets the nation all at 15, which redefines the whole landscape and the whole floor, which does have uplifting cumulative thing. I can't deny that, right? But fancy the way it's being used, and I'll wrap it up, folks. Look at the way it's being used. It was jammed into a reconciliation bill, which everybody, any commentator that knows, and I don't mean to be snobbery, I don't think that I know enough, but I know enough to be like, oh yeah, look, those guys told you it wasn't going to work, right? Because there's two reasons why people snap about how that's not going to work when something is proposed. And if you pay attention to that crowd, you find that there's two voices there. The ones that just want to discourage it from happening and will grasp at straws and mostly fail to come up with really good reasons. And those you just kind of go, not a really good reason. And the ones that know, that push the glasses up with the nerds, like the just legitimately, undebunkably, no, it's not going to work that way, you guys, because there's rules, right? This is a system of systems. Flawed or as unwarrantedly, patriotically pretending to be perfect as it may be to your mind, it is a system of systems, right? And the warnings were warned. And people even said, oh, the parliamentarian's gonna like get a little action here. And they're getting bitch smacked around. That poor office is. Whoever the person is at that office is getting a lot of flack right now. But all of that is a lot of hubbub that feels like I hate it when I make random object strike and then have to and I really wish I can like hyper edit that right now, but I can't, because now it's just a weird, annoying, chunky noise in the middle of the show. But that hubbub and the showboating around it feels like a little bit distractionary and maybe even a little bit gaslighting-y from your own leadership of your own party, Team Blue, because the warnings were evident and came early enough to be like, okay, you should either strategize another way around, not pin your hopes on it, and or vote for these people without buying into they're going to get that $15 in on the first 100 days hope, which was alluded to and sometimes overtly stated, but never a really strong horse in the race, to mix metaphors really badly. For the reason that the parliamentarian points out, which I called out in my own show, right? And I've brought this to my conversations on the social medias, and someone said that the Supreme Court ruled that perhaps maybe the parliamentarian might be wrong in its interpretation, or that it does impact the budget somehow. And I never clicked through to that link, so I can't pretend to be well enough informed to you to like update my opinion on it. But my read was the parliamentarian is going to say, because that's not actually money that the federal government is paying out. In other words, raising the minimum wage will impact the federal government in many ways, for sure. And theoretically, hopefully, generate a lot more income tax revenue, which people support and people don't support, and some people are wildly indifferent about. But it's not a line item like, we, the federal government, are going to pay everybody $600 checks, or $1,000 checks, or $2,000 checks, or whatever. Put a pin in that, because there's a whole nother subject worth discussing right there. Right back up on the corkboard. Which I've already kind of done a little bit of, discussion on some of the fringe ingredients there. But we'll come back to it. the here and now of a $15 minimum, of raising the minimum wage, it's overdue, right? It shouldn't be something, and this is my honest, like, sincere, like, aspirational, I'm not a statist, but I believe that, that there can be a version of the state-federal relationship system of systems that works for the people, by the people, of the people, and that, politicians are truly authentic representatives and servants of the people and not power-mongering tyrants, oppressing the people. And that I know that is not necessarily the way in which it operates now, and its flaws, et cetera, we can get into all kinds of wild discussion about. But I've been rambling long enough. It shouldn't have to be a thing that gets jammed into a reconciliation mechanism-based emergency payout to sustain the economy, right? And it's also, if you think about it really thoughtfully, eclipsed by the universal basic income issue as like, yeah, we could raise the minimum wage to a kind of useless number, or we could really do the real work of establishing a universal basic income and call it like an investment, right? Couple it with, so that it's sort of like a smart investment tool for the nation, which could be sort of, and I know that the big socialist word will get flung out there, but I don't think of this as socialism. I think of this as like smart fiscal social investment leveraging that can do the sort of floor lifting that the minimum wage is being romanticized about, but at a much more thoughtful level. If you go to universal basic income and you go to like $2,420, right, which is both cutesy and better than what millions of people take home at any of the various minimum wage level jobs, or worse now, and you make it for anybody that's alive and living in the nation, as crazy as that sounds like socialism. What are they going to do with that money? They're going to spend it on rent, food, and basic goods that this entire consumerist oligarchy empire is built on. Duh. I'm actually amazed that the super mega bazillionaires do not support using some of their own money in a sort of make me a hero kind of way to give us money so that we can give them their money back in a way that makes them more money. Right? Like, duh. Like, we invented money. Why aren't we using it to just make everybody more money? So that everybody can make more money. Since it's something we invented. And not water, which is something that Mother Nature gives to us for free. Is Mother Nature socialism? No. Socialism is being used in a heavy-handed vilification, abusive, let's just call anything that we don't want the Republicans to like socialism. And we got to stop that, right? Vis-a-vis the whole, let's just stop using ideology and start using civic discourse to do pragmatic, civic engineering and civic planning and take civic action and do things civilly that need to get done, like taking care of everybody, giving everybody a job, giving everybody income. Everybody needs income, right? And they can create whatever jobs they want. Invest. If the top 20% invested a decimal point percentage of their wealth into the bottom, everyone who's, just above the poverty line and anywhere below it, so that we could all buy food and clothes and entertainment media and news media and buy it and coffee, like all the staples, right? If we could all just afford to buy all that stuff and then go, what would we want to do with our lives now that all the struggle bus shit ain't shit no more? What would we do? What would we build? We've got a little bit of money that we can invest and double down and invest in each other and invest in our communities and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And go work, right? Like, go build as more and more jobs are replaced by robots. Because, hey, some of us, y'all, have been warning you since like the 40s, the robots are coming. And in the most benign version, that means less work. Does that mean poverty for everybody? Or can it mean reasonable income for all while still garnering wealth for the wealthy? As long as the wealthy see themselves as titans of reinvesting back in humanity. Do we need to, heal the human system's networked ego that's corrupt as fuck and a little bit too greedy and kind of addicted to addictions in order to get that done? Perhaps. So I hope, friends, you will join me for more of this sort of discourse in the public realm of podcast public discourse called this show, The Incorrigible Mr. Zappa's Almost Daily Zencast, just presented at your ear holes. Good morning, Trumptopia. Our first little stab at discussing what's going on in the post-Trumptopian era. Stay tuned, folks, because this Congressional Inquisition into the events of January 6th is going to result in some report, right? And we got to take that report with a grain of salt and not chuck it out of hand and not fearmonger ourselves right into the ego trap of violence for violence's sake. And we got to remember that we have it in our power to change. And as, many of folks throughout time and in many places have reminded us, it takes, personal courage and collective courage. It takes personal change and collective change. It takes personal healing and collective healing.
And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily Zencast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.
Stay tuned, friends, because after a break and a little bit of the ubiquitous advertising necessary by all the platforms everywhere to make it all roll and function, I'll be back alongside my sidekick here, the DJ Zed, with a new regular feature on the show, animatronic robot dance music revolutions from the future. Hang tight. A bit like Midnight Sessions, which I'm going to reserve for days where I literally do it at midnight. Because then it's more fun for me that way. I'm gonna, or I guess songs that sound like they're being made at or played at midnight. But I may just replace Midnight Sessions with this, because no matter what time you listen, no matter what time you tune in, the theme is what I'm trying to convey with the words on the cover page. So hang on tight, folks. I'll be back in a few. As always, namaste. May peace, love, and grooviness be blossoming in your heart. Don't know how to do that? Inquire within.